What is this? Copy. I'll be with you soon. Just waiting for more people to come in. Oh, here we go. Facebook. Gotta tell people I'm here. Oh, my internet is so slow. Okay. That ought to do it. I guess you'll be listening on the replay. Oh, Christ. Yes, I still smoke cigarettes, just not nearly as many because they cost too much. When I smoke a cigarette, my blood pressure shoots up to normal. Okay, I think I'm ready to take a walk into Woo-Woo Land. Now, last time I spoke about this book, Empire of the Wheel, #1, by Walter Bosley and Richard B. Spence. The subtitle is An Investigation of Occult Espionage and Murder. You gotta bear with me, I see everything backward while I'm doing this. Now, this is my little cave. It's my whole house, practically. It's a 20 by 20 box. I'm going to talk about my late husband, Philip K. Dick. Yes, they called me a child bride. I was 18, he was 42 when I met him. He soon turned 43. That makes a difference of 25 years. And it wasn't that I was looking for an older man, but it was that I didn't care. I was looking for someone who took me seriously on an intellectual level. And so I've written a few books, memoirs about him. This one is Conversations with Philip K. Dick, with amazing cover art by Nick Buchanan, who refuses to let me pay him a single penny for it. And it's kind of disjointed. It isn't going straight along a timeline. It jumps back and forth. This one is my newest. Blade Runner creator Philip K. Dick. It's primarily a review of the 2 Blade Runner movies and the book that Philip K. Dick wrote, which is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And please include the question mark in the title. The book is available in some editions under the title Blade Runner. This cover art is also by Nick Buchanan. He's amazing, amazing. And once again, he won't let me pay him for it. I'm in the process of delving into the exegesis more deeply. Let's get this hat off. It isn't that cold in here. The exegesis was Phil's attempt to explain the mystical experiences that he had. Now, most fans and readers are aware that he had amazing experiences beginning in February and March of 1974. But really, he had these experiences all his life, beginning in early childhood. Oh, and thank you for the thumbs up. I don't see any chatting, but I see two whole people listening, and that's awesome. Okay. I don't see where I could chat. Let's see. Some messages may not be visible. Here we go, live chat. Welcome to live chat. All right. Good morning, everyone. It's really hard for me to type and talk at the same time. Sometimes I absolutely cannot do it. Here we go. Now the chat is open for certain. Hi, Ellie. Good to see you. All right. When Phil was a very young child, he used to pretend that he was playing with his twin sister Jane, who had died. She was only 6 weeks old when she passed away. They were twins born at home in Chicago in the winter. And they weighed about 2 pounds each. Jane was smaller than Phil. Well, hello. No, it's not Nimsa, it's Nima. Welcome. So Phil's twin sister simply was unable to survive. The hospital did what they could, and they did save Phil. If Phil's mother, Dorothy, had not gotten her babies to the hospital despite poverty and hardship, we would never have had Philip K. Dick writing Blade Runner, Minority Report, and so many other books. Oh, wow, I have a listener in Iran. Wow, that's awesome. Anyway, um, when he was very young, he would pretend that he was playing cowboys. Not cowboys and Indians, just cowboys, like Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, with his sister Jane, who had passed away. And sometimes she seemed like a real presence to him. Now, Phil was influenced by his favorite aunt, uh, his mother Dorothy's sister Marion. Marion was a trance medium, and when she had a major stroke, nobody knew it because they thought she was in one of her trances. So that delayed her being taken to the hospital. Perhaps she might have survived if she'd gone sooner, perhaps not. Anyway, I got bits and pieces of the story from Phil and more bits and pieces from both Dorothy, his mother, and Edgar, his father. His father's name was Joseph Edgar Dick, but he liked to be called Edgar. Phil's middle name, Kindred, was Dorothy's maiden name. Now, Phil got into a sort of Hamlet thing when um, his mother married Marion's widower. Her sister died and she married her sister's husband and raised her sister's children, Phil's cousins. Um, wow. So Phil was thinking, like Hamlet, that this was some kind of incest. And um, the name of this man was Joseph, just like Joseph Edgar, Phil's father. Um, I think the last name was Hudner, Hudner. At that time, Phil was married to Nancy, Lisa's mother, and they offered to adopt Marion's children, who were teenagers, but that never happened. Okay. Anyway, Phil was often sent to boarding schools and summer camps because Dorothy left Phil's father, Joseph Edgar Dick, when Phil was very young. I think he was 2 or 3 years old. And Dorothy worked. Ironically, she wrote pamphlets for the federal government, those how-to pamphlets that you can get from the government for free. And she wrote about child care and how to raise children and educate children. But she really did not do well with Phil. Dorothy was very English and in culture, and the English did not, at that time, in that generation, they did not coddle their children. They didn't do much hugging. And Phil, being a very needy baby who was born premature and lost his sister and knew it because Dorothy told him, Phil needed a lot of cuddling and hugging. He still did when I met him. And Dorothy wasn't available for that. When Phil was in high school, he would come home after school and he had to keep quiet because Dorothy, when she got home from work, would go sit in her bed and read a book every day. And her goal was to read an entire novel every day. So she got the Reader's Digest condensed books. They were short enough to read in one day. Well, at one of the summer camps when Phil was about 7 years old, he got separated from the group. He ran off into the woods because they had a bonfire and they were roasting marshmallows, and one of the boys got too close and his clothing was set on fire. And Phil just totally freaked out and ran off into the woods. It was horrible. And then he was lost and couldn't find his way back. And out of nowhere, a man appeared, took Phil by the hand, and led him to the group. And when Phil turned to thank the man, he disappeared. Phil thought maybe this was his own future self saving him as a child. I told you we were walking into woo-woo land. And Phil had a number of experiences long before March of 1974. He placed the date as the second day of March in 1974, but in Europe, they do the dates backwards. They say that we do the dates backwards. So when they saw 3/2/74, they thought it was February 3rd. It wasn't. And finally, Phil gave up and just started calling it February and March of 1974. And it did begin around the 18th. I'm not sure on the date. I have it written down somewhere. I think it was the 18th of February when he had his uh, broken molar extracted under general anesthesia. And when he came home, he went straight to bed and waited for the pharmacy to deliver his antibiotics and pain pills. So when the lady from the pharmacy came to the door, I tried to get there first and take care of it. But Phil was quicker. He jumped out of bed and ran to the front door, still groggy from the medication. And he was looking down her blouse. So he made the excuse that he wondered about her necklace, which had a fish sign. And Phil pretended to be ignorant that he didn't know what it was. And so, in the dramatic descriptions in which Phil himself exaggerated and embellished, a beam of pink light emanated from the fish sign on her necklace and hit him in the forehead. But what really happened was, after I handed a check to the woman and she left, Phil turned to go back down the hallway, and the light of the late afternoon sun hit a sticker that we had on our living room window. The sticker was very shiny. It was part black and part silver, and that flash of light from that sticker in our window temporarily blinded Phil. And when he looked away and he kept seeing this pink light, which of course is phosphine activity that you always see when you look away from a bright light. Now, that sticker happened to be a fish sign, a Christian fish sign that Phil had bought at a local shop. He knew what the fish sign was. Well, anyway, he went to the bathroom and got a glass of water and took his pills. And he took a double dose of the pain pills, which were Percodan. It's like codeine on steroids. It's an opiate. Today we have opioids. Then they had opiates or eights. And then he went and lay down and proceeded to see all kinds of amazing uh, shining images on the white wall of our bedroom. But it was later that he set the date for his experience as March 2, 1974, because that was the day that the Xerox letter arrived. It was a strange letter. It was postmarked in Austria with no return address or name. But research by Phil and me has strongly suggested that it came from Franz Rothensteiner, an Austrian editor and author who was fairly well known, really well known among science fiction fans. But it was just a Xerox of a newspaper article. and it was a book review. I think it was World Net Daily, but I can't swear to it. I was completely ignorant of those things back then. I mean, I was almost 20 years old. I had a little baby to raise, and I hadn't been out in the world very much. So, anyway, this Xerox letter was a book review of a book whose title and author I don't remember, but the book had the word carousel in its title. And since reading Walter Bosley's book, Empire of the Wheel, which he co authored with Richard B. Spence, I've learned that carousels, I would call it merry-go-round, have an occult meaning related to the telluric currents in the earth. You might call them ley lines, but they're not exactly the same thing. There really are telluric currents in the earth. They're related to the earth's magnetic field. And a carousel or merry-go-round can be, if it's in the right location, it can be a sort of portal into another realm. Well, anyway, certain words were underlined in this on this Xerox letter. Some had been underlined before it was copied, and some were underlined in red ink, and some were underlined in blue ink. So it suggested that at least two and probably three hands took part in underlining words, and they were words like decrepit, rotting, all to do with decay and degeneration and death. Well, the most, you know, I kind of thought that letter was weird primarily because it didn't say who had sent it. But I wasn't going the woo woo route just yet. There was the night when our radio continued to play after it was turned off, so I unplugged it and it continued to play the soft, popular music that we usually listened to when we were going to sleep at night. But Phil wanted it turned off, and it would not turn off. And this was not the kind of radio that you have today. It was not digital. It did not have a battery. It actually had tubes, even though it was solid state, which was an early form of computer chips. It did have tubes. It had to warm up when you turned it on. But being solid state, it warmed up pretty fast. And if you left it plugged in, it stayed warmed up. It used a little electricity. Well, this darn thing, I finally took it out to the living room, went back to the bedroom and shut the door so we didn't have to hear it. Now that tells me that there was something real going on, an electromagnetic influence, whether deliberate or accidental. There had to be a strong electromagnetic signal nearby. At that point, it would have had to be portable because we had neighbors next door. Uh, it was either, I think it was two young men, students at the local college. Might have been three, but I think it was two. And Phil actually asked them the next day if they had been playing their stereo. And no, they hadn't been. Well, after they moved out, things got even worse. The that apartment stayed vacant. And one day, this yellow Ford Econoline van pulled up out front, and men in overalls wheeled in big cardboard boxes full of something and took them to the vacant apartment. Eventually, we got curious, and finding the door to the apartment unlocked, we went inside. And there was all kinds of electronic equipment, including a working telephone. I picked up the phone one time and I heard two women talking, so I thought, aha, our landlord is spying on his wife. He thinks she's cheating on him. And around that time also, our telephone kept failing to work. It wouldn't ring, or calls wouldn't come through, or we'd get cut off in the middle of a phone call. So, of course, we had the phone company come out to fix it. We didn't have cell phones in 1974. The phone was bolted to the wall in the kitchen. And if you paid extra, you could get a long cord to the handset so you could walk around a little. Anyway, the repairman fixed our phone and told us that the problem was that someone had an illegal connection to our phone, and the apartment next door was the source of it. In other words, they were spying on us and recording our phone calls and possibly our conversations until the phone company unhooked that illegal connection. And I'd like to know why. There was a lot of drug dealing in Fullerton at that time, and it was only a block or two from our apartment, but we were not suspects. We even knew one of the undercover narcotics officers, and we knew that he was a narc. And I can say his name now because he's no longer living. A few years after Phil died, Jorge Aguilar was murdered by drug dealers in a drug bust in Los Angeles. Shot to death in a raid on a major drug operation. He wasn't going after someone who might sell you a lid of pot. That was the measurement back then. A lid was a baggie stuffed full, a sandwich-sized baggie. And then they had things like 2 fingers. If the height of the pot in the bottom of the baggie was the same as 2 fingers, that was a 2 fingers of pot. No, he was after the big heroin and speed dealers who dealt in pounds and kilos and thousands of dollars. Well, anyway, I think the electronic equipment next door had a strong effect on Phil and not so much on me. I mean, I heard the radio playing music. Phil heard the radio telling him to die, to kill himself, that he was worthless. And I never heard that. And when Phil saw people kind of hiding out in the corner of our living room, he heard them speaking, even though their mouths did not move. But I just kind of saw them almost out of the corner of my eye, and they were transparent but 3-dimensional, like a hologram. Now, in the public, we didn't have holograms that good. Holograms existed, but they were not that realistic. But as most people know nowadays, by the time we see a new technology, the military has had it for at least 20 years. I think they were holographic images, and I don't know why Phil heard them speak and I did not, but I do know that they were strange. Their heads looked funny. They were like the famous statue of Nefertiti, with the back of the head being much larger than a normal human head, and with a small nose and small mouth and big eyes, but not like a gray alien. They were human, and they were telling Phil that in the future they had messed things up and humanity was coming to an end, partly through pollution, partly through warfare with weapons that were far beyond nuclear, not just hydrogen bombs, not just atomic bombs, but something worse. And on top of that, they had engaged in eugenics. They had tried to purify the human race, to eliminate disease and birth defects by messing with the DNA. Um, and the result was that they could no longer procreate. They could not have children. They could not make babies. And they were telling Phil all this because they wanted to change their past, which was our present in 1974, to stop this from happening. Now, we both wondered how much a little known science fiction author who couldn't even pay the bills on time could change the world. But they wanted him to write about it, and boy, did he write about it. That was the seed of the Valis novels. There are 3 Valis novels, and because I was not involved in the literary estate or trust, nobody asked me. It took decades for them to figure out that the transmigration of Timothy Archer is not part of the Valis trilogy. The third book is actually the book that was originally titled Valis System A, and it's now known as Radio Free Albemuth. I don't know where I put my copy of the book. It's also been made into an excellent movie that actually tells a story. You won't get shocked by car chases, explosions, and gunfights. They didn't really have much of a budget for special effects, but it's more like a very dark version of 1984 or Fahrenheit 451. Or it's really something. It's about how music can save the world on a superficial level, but on a deeper level, it's how the children, our children, are the future. And that as we descend into a sort of mixture of anarchy and dictatorship, our real hope for the future is our children. Of course, the other 2 novels in the Valis trilogy were correctly identified. We have Valis, The Divine Invasion, and Radio Free Albemuth. Now, The Divine Invasion is notable for is not quite as intelligent as normal people. He's kind of autistic. And yet he is important. In other words, don't try to fix him. Don't do this eugenics thing where you eliminate autistics and less intelligent people or those with physical defects. It's a bad move. Let's see. I have two novels that I'd like to show you. Fallen Angels. No, it is not particularly Christian, Jewish, or biblical. Once again, that's Nick Buchanan's awesome artwork. Fallen Angels, I need to do some editing on it for typos and a couple glitches. It's basically an expanded version of a novel that I called Origins. On one level, it is kind of about the creation, but not really. It's more about the planet that blew up and formed our asteroid belt, and the people who lived there taking refuge on Earth. I really do plan a sequel. I see this as a trilogy. At the end of Fallen Angels, the refugees from the planet Terra meet the first man, which of course is Adam. So in the second book, there should be a flood, a global flood, and all kinds of interesting things. But I have to keep putting my writing aside to earn a living. I'm working on it in those moments when I can. And then I have a surrealistic novel, The Darkening of the Light. And I believe that's Nick Buchanan's artwork. Yes. Awesome artwork. The Darkening of the Light. And on the back, the thing is, The Darkening of the Light is weird. First, a woman who happens to be a school teacher gets one of the first brain implant computer chips. But something goes wrong and she goes into a coma and she's dreaming. And some of her dreams are memories and some of them are just really surreal. Well, then her husband is attacked by aliens and he goes into a coma. And he has these weird dreams and they begin to share their dreams. Now, you are not supposed to know whether either of them really is in a coma. Is Edith, I think that's her name, is she imagining what happened to her husband? Or is he imagining what happened to her? Or are they both caught in a Edna? Sorry, not Edith, her name's Edna. Are they both caught in something larger? They end up in Dante's Inferno. They end up in Mozart's Magic Flute. And they never find the redemption that they seek. They're not the best of people and they need forgiveness, which they find. But they never make it to paradise. They make it back to this world, changed for the better. but I'm not going to give away the plot. I'm just going to tell you that you have to have a really open mind to the weird and paranormal to enjoy this book. It is probably my best work. I also have a murder mystery. I don't have a copy of it, although it's supposed to be delivered today. I ordered some copies for local people, local stores, because it has a woman detective living with her cat in Twin Peaks, which is a real community in the San Bernardino Mountains, and it's near Lake Arrowhead. I don't know how long I've been on the air. Oh, here we go, 40 minutes. This is my longest YouTube video so far. I'm able to be on YouTube more often now because a colleague bought me a new laptop computer that actually works and has a webcam and a microphone built in. Wow, it's just awesome to be able to do this. I'm trying to figure out what all these doohickeys are on Facebook. Let's see, let's type thank you for listening and commenting. Hey, no typos that I can see. So, anyway, back to Philip K. Dick. He had experiences like the ones I describe in The Darkening of the Light. I need to do something about the lighting in this room. Maybe move the lamp to behind me, but then my face will look really weird and ghostly and ghastly. Anyway, in the 1960s, when Phil was married to Nancy, one night he was awakened because Nancy was screaming, and Phil opened his eyes and saw a man standing at the foot of their bed. But as soon as Phil saw that man, the man disappeared like a mist. And Phil thought that it was himself standing at the foot of that bed looking at himself and Nancy. Well, years later, in the 1970s, Phil had a dream in which he was the man standing at the foot of the bed while Nancy screamed. I think he wanted to, well, Phil thought he wanted to remind himself that he was his future self was always watching over him. And maybe that's so. Maybe. Uh, well, the experiences of the darkening of the light, well, I think Phil was targeted in some way, and probably deliberately, considering that our phone was tapped, that he was that our radio wouldn't turn off even when it was unplugged. But he began to meditate, and while he was meditating, he would be lying on the bed but awake, and he would see various historical figures sitting in the chair next to the bed. Problem was, we didn't have a chair next to the bed, let alone Erasmus or, oh, crud. Blanking again. The author of The New Atlantis. Let's see. The New Atlantis. Francis Bacon. He had conversations with long dead historical figures. In one, Erasmus appeared to Phil dressed in a long flowing black robe with figures of stars and crescent moons, of course, in white against the black background, and Erasmus was laughing at him. Well, Erasmus, who lived in the 14 and 1500s, I believe, definitely the 1500s, produced a translation of the New Testament. Desiderius Erasmus, born 1466, died 1536. Okay, he was Dutch, born in Rotterdam, but he died, well, I've forgotten already. I think it was either Switzerland or Austria. Let's get it again. Oh, Switzerland, Basel, Switzerland. Okay, Erasmus, his translation of the New Testament was interlinear. In other words, he had a number of Greek manuscripts. The Vatican basically ordered him to do this. They sponsored him and gave him these Greek manuscripts. And there are slight differences among manuscripts. So he would copy the Greek and then interlinear on another line, either above or below the Greek, he would translate it, I believe, into English. Well, that's weird. Him being Dutch and speaking Dutch. What is he most famous for? New Testament. Oh, that's right. Now my brain's beginning to work. He translated the Greek into Latin because the Latin Vulgate, according to the Vatican, wanted the Latin Vulgate to be more correct, more in line with the manuscripts that they had at that time. But as the story goes, Erasmus added something. And I should have just written some notes by hand. Added to the New Testament. It had to do with the divinity of the Trinity. Okay. Come on. A spurious reference to the Trinity added in 1 John 5, verses 7 and 8. Okay, 1 John is a letter by or to John. Anyway, you can look it up. 1 John chapter 5, verses 7 and 8 refer to the Trinity, and Erasmus added that on orders from the Vatican to make sure that his translation of the New Testament supported the idea of the Trinity. So in Phil's mind, that explained why Erasmus was laughing. Erasmus was in on the joke. Now, there's plenty of other reasons to believe in the doctrine of the Trinity. But the Vatican, the Pope, in other words, and the cardinals wanted it spelled out specifically. We have Jesus as the Son praying to the Father and promising his disciples that the Spirit would come. So we have a Trinity. It just is more implied than explicit. I've been going for nearly an hour, and that's kind of my limit here. But we will walk even more into woo-woo land in future podcasts or YouTube videos or whatever you call them, because I have access to things that Phil did not. I need to grab 2 books. My next video will be on the work of Robert Guffey. The first one is crypto scatology. Cat hair on my book. Conspiracy theory as art form. Now, Guffey is a professor at Long Beach, and crypto scatology is basically about the use of language to fool people. Let's look at the back. It's been a while since I read it. Conspiracy theory. And he looks at the moon landing, the Kennedy assassination, the Oklahoma City bombing, Freemasonry, all kinds of stuff. The way the media keep the truth from us by turning it into a joke, like, oh, these people saw a flying saucer, ha ha ha. And then, even more frightening, is Camellia, a strange but true story of invisible spies, heroin addiction, and Homeland Security by Robert Guffey. In this one, it's actually naval intelligence just harasses this poor drug addict who just was in the wrong place at the wrong time when someone had stolen some pretty advanced technology from a naval base. And if they can do that to this poor heroin addict who just, let some people flop at his house after partying with drugs and alcohol, they certainly could do that to Philip K. Dick, who had received a phone call from Dr. Timothy Leary. Back when Phil was married to Nancy, he got this phone call. And the man on the other end of the line said, "Hi, this is Timothy Leary." And Phil said, "Oh, yeah, sure, you bet." He didn't believe it. But it was Leary, and he proved it. He was in Canada in a bed-in with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. And at the time, Leary was on the run, having escaped from prison, and it was a federal prison. I think it was San Quentin. Anyway, the feds were after Leary. So even if they did not have Phil's phone tapped, they certainly were listening in on Timothy Leary's calls. And it was after that phone call that all the strange things happened in San Rafael, where before I met Phil, where he was eventually driven out of town. His house was broken into numerous times and finally really trashed, almost destroyed in what looked like a military style raid. So I'm sure that someone was spying on Phil from that point forward because of his connection to Dr. Timothy Leary. Also, Phil told me that John Lennon got on the phone and told Phil that the song Paperback Writer was about him. In other words, when the Beatles recorded Paperback Writer, they were talking about Philip K. Dick. Amazing. But our hour is almost up, so next time we will get to Robert Guffey's Camellia about real life spying on a random, almost random target who wasn't in on the story or the game, and cryptoscatology, which is really about propaganda and how even though, oh, hi, Kev P from Liverpool. Well, he must be a Beatles fan. Anyway, I'm almost done here, but next time we'll talk about propaganda and how the propagandists don't need to change reality. They only need to change our perception of it. And then Camellia, in which we explore invisibility cloaks and holographic projections and what did they call it? The CIA called it the voice of God in Iraq. Supposedly they transmitted into the heads of the Iraqi soldiers that Allah was telling them to surrender. Well, if that happened in the 1990s or the early 2000s, you can bet we had that technology in the 1970s. And the people that Phil saw, and a couple of times I saw them briefly, just might have been holographic projections. I see. My comment said, "I, Kev." I meant hi with an H, as in hello. I'm sorry you came in so late, but in a little bit, I'm sure this will be up as a replay. Um, I'm not sure how long YouTube takes to archive a live show, but it shouldn't be too long. I honestly believe that Phil and I were both subjected to mind manipulation, a form of propaganda directed just at the two of us, and mostly at Phil. And that voice that he thought was coming from the radio telling him to die just might have been transmitted directly into his head because I never heard it. I just heard music playing. And the fact is, if there's a strong signal, a microwave or radio wave or radar signal nearby, it will cause electronic devices to turn on even when they're unplugged and have no source of power that you can see. And they were spying on us. And all we were trying to do was to raise our child and maybe earn enough money to pay the bills. Phil was widely ignored at the time, but Apparently, he just came to their attention in the 60s and they never let go. When it comes to law enforcement on any level, you don't have to do anything wrong. All you have to do is come to the attention of the authorities, and they're sure that they can arrest you for something. They're sure that you're doing something wrong. And it can take decades for them to let go, or they might never let go. Anyway, our hour is up. And I'm sorry, but I have to go and do a little puttering around the house and a little reading and maybe get some food. So thank you all for listening. And be sure to keep an eye out because I'm not on a particular schedule. So I don't know when I'll be back, but it will be soon, maybe tomorrow. And thank you all again. Goodbye and God bless, and see you next time.